We've talked about stubs, we've talked about mocks. Let's talk about fakes or shims. And if you look at the slide, you're going to see that there's three different ones. We've got stubs and mocks, which we've already talked about, and then fakes. Now, what's the difference here? Fakes really are objects that have working implementations behind them, but there's some shortcut which makes them not suitable for production, the things that we want to get out of those. I often hear them called shims. I have a difficulty disambiguating shims from fakes, and I know that
and the fakes framework.
And the fakes framework. There's the Microsoft Fakes framework, and they provide shims and fakes. But let's just keep it as simple as possible and talk about what shims and fakes do. They modify the code of the application at runtime to return something appropriate. So instead of making a specific call, you'll interrupt that call and give back the data that you want. They can be used to make calls against assemblies that you can't modify. So for instance, if you're, the canonical example is system.datetime. Right? You can't go in and override that. There's no interface you can grab and plug in. If you're calling system.datetime and you're trying to check for a Y2K problem, or I guess the next upcoming one is the Unix file system one in the 40s, or the 2040s, well, we're doing that. We can't just we can't stub it out. So how do you do that? And you do that with something like a fakes framework. And those tend to be a lot more sophisticated than a traditional mocking or stubs framework, because they do things that are kind of munging at the code level and at the memory level. One quick thing I'd like to note, if you take a look at the slide, stubs generally are faster than shims. They're compiled, they're part of your code, they move really fast. They can implement interfaces only generally. They don't do non-static methods or sealed methods. And we use them to replace these visible methods. But shims can replace calls to private methods if you choose. They can replace calls to whatever you need to fake out. And so stubs are used to isolate dependencies in your code base. Same with mocks. Shims or fakes are used to isolate dependencies that you take from a third-party control. And I think I want to do one last thing. If you take a look here, this is an example of the Microsoft Fakes framework. It used to be called Moles. This is a Visual Studio Enterprise 2015 or Ultimate 2013 feature. But Peter Provost had a great one that says, shims are a sledgehammer for legacy code. And he reiterated something that Martin Fowler had said, and I like this. Untested code should not be, it reiterated that untested code should not be refactored, and the shims let you write temporary tests that allow you to immediately refactor the method while it's under test. Once refactored, the tests are passing, you immediately rewrite the unit test with something other than shims. Shims are a crutch. They're not something you use in your own code. They're something you use when you take a dependency on a third party and you absolutely, positively have to do it. Let's take a quick break and we're going to jump back and take a look at a fast demo.